The prairie wind carried the sound of crying long before the lonely cowboy ever saw the source. Out on the wide stretch of land, where the sky seemed to swallow the earth whole, a small homestead sat slumped against the weight of years and sorrow. The boards were weathered, the roof sagged, and the fences leaned like weary men. It was there that Daniel McGraw reined in his horse, Shadow, and listened. The sound wasn't the bawl of cattle or the cry of a newborn calf. It was the thin, desperate wail of children. Daniel dismounted slowly, boots crunching against the dry dirt. His spurs jingled, but he made no other sound. For years he had lived as a widower, keeping to himself, tending his herd, and burying his grief beneath endless work. The silence of his ranch had become his companion. But now, that silence was pierced by voices too fragile to be left ignored. He pushed open the broken gate and walked toward the porch. On the steps sat 3 little girls, barefoot, faces streaked with dust and tears, dresses worn thin by hardship. Their eyes widened when they saw him, but none ran. Perhaps they were too tired, or perhaps they had long since stopped expecting kindness from strangers. Behind them, the door creaked open. A woman appeared. She was young, though weariness had etched lines across her face. Strands of dark hair fell loose from a kerchief, framing eyes the color of storm clouds. Her hands trembled as she gripped the doorframe, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "We've got nothing to give you, sir," she said. Daniel took off his hat, holding it respectfully against his chest. "Wasn't looking to take." For a moment, they only stared at each other. The prairie wind filled the silence. Then, from inside the house, a man's voice, slurred with drink, sharp with cruelty, broke through. "You still out there beggin' for pity, girl? Get back inside." The woman flinched, but did not move. Her daughters pressed against her legs, small hands clutching her skirts. Daniel's jaw tightened. He knew that kind of voice all too well, the kind that had no love left to give, only blame. The man stumbled into view, his face red, his shirt half-buttoned. He sneered at Daniel. "What do you want, cowboy?" "Just passin' through," Daniel said evenly. His eyes flicked to the girls. "Didn't mean to intrude." "Then keep ridin'," the man snapped. He shoved the woman aside roughly, making her stagger. The girls whimpered. Daniel's hand twitched toward his holster, but he kept it still. Violence was not his first answer. Instead, he studied the man. The bitterness, the drink, the anger, he'd seen it before. But what caught his attention most was the words that spilled out next. "3 daughters," the man spat, glaring at the woman. "3. What good are they? I wanted sons. A real legacy. Instead, she cursed me with mouths to feed and no one to carry my name." The woman's eyes dropped, shame pressing down like chains she did not deserve. Daniel felt something stir in his chest. Anger, yes, but also sorrow. He remembered his own wife, Mary, and the way she had held their baby boy before fever carried them both away. He remembered nights alone, whispering prayers to a sky that never answered. He remembered the silence of an empty crib. And now, here stood a man who had been blessed with daughters yet treated them as burdens. Daniel spoke slowly, voice low but firm. "They're children. That's legacy enough." The drunk sneered. "Spare me your sermons. You don't know nothin' about it. You ain't got no wife, no family." Daniel's eyes darkened. "I had both." The man faltered for just a moment, then scoffed. "Doesn't matter. These girls ain't worth a damn." He turned back toward the woman, raising his hand as if to strike. That was enough. Daniel stepped forward, his shadow falling across the porch. His voice cut through the air, sharper than any blade. "You lay another hand on her, and you'll answer to me." The drunk froze, startled by the steel in Daniel's tone. He lowered his hand slowly, muttering curses under his breath. Then, with a final glare at the woman and her daughters, he staggered inside and slammed the door. Silence settled again, broken only by the soft sobs of the little girls. The woman gathered them close, her body trembling. She looked up at Daniel, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You shouldn't have interfered," she whispered. "He'll make us pay for it later." Daniel shook his head. No one should pay for being born daughters. He crouched down, looking at the three girls. Their eyes, wide and uncertain, met his. He saw hunger, fear, but also a spark of something unbroken. He placed his hat gently on the smallest girl's head, making her blink in surprise. Then he spoke words he hadn't planned to say, words that came from a place deep within his chest, where grief and longing had lived too long. "Then let me raise them proud." The woman's breath caught. What do you mean?" Daniel rose to his full height, shoulders squared against the endless prairie sky. "I've lost before. Lost my wife, lost my son. But I know what it means to love, even when it hurts. These girls deserve better than shame. They deserve to grow up knowing they're treasures, not curses." The woman stared at him, torn between disbelief and a fragile hope she dared not let bloom. The girls clung tighter to her, their small faces turned toward the cowboy who had spoken for them when no one else would. For the first time in years, Daniel felt something shift in his chest. The silence he had lived with so long began to crack, not with sorrow, but with possibility. The prairie wind whispered through the grass, carrying away the last echo of the drunkard's rage. And in its place, a promise took root. A promise that would change all their lives. The morning sun rose over the prairie like a great golden lantern, spilling light across the ranchlands. Daniel McGraw was already at work, saddling Shadow in the corral. He wasn't a man who lingered in bed. Too many years of ranching had taught him that the day's strength lay in its first hours. But this morning felt different. When he turned, he saw them, the woman, her name now known to him as Clara, standing in the doorway with her three little girls. They were hesitant, still cautious after years of cruelty, but there was a light in their eyes that had not been there yesterday. The smallest girl still wore Daniel's hat, far too big for her head. She kept adjusting it with a giggle, as though afraid he might ask for it back. Clara stepped forward, her voice soft. "You meant what you said, didn't you? About raising them proud." Daniel nodded, cinching the saddle strap. "A man's word ought to mean something." "Mine does." Clara looked down at her daughters. Their hands clutched her skirts, but she could see their little eyes darting toward Daniel, filled with a trust they hadn't felt toward any man, not even their own father. She swallowed hard. "I don't know how to thank you. You don't even know us." Daniel rested a hand on Shadow's mane, then glanced at her. His voice was quiet but steady. "I know enough. I know what it's like to bury the ones you love and wish you'd done more while you had the chance. I don't aim to stand by and watch another family fall apart." Clara's lips trembled, though she forced back tears. She had never heard words like that, not from her husband, not from her kinfolk who had shunned her for birthing daughters instead of sons. For years she had carried her shame in silence. And now, here was a stranger, a widowed cowboy with grief of his own, offering her daughters a pride and love she had never been able to promise. She whispered, "If you truly mean it, then maybe we can start over." The change. Daniel opened his home to them. The first nights were uncertain. The girls clung to their mother, afraid that kindness might vanish with the dawn. Clara moved about Daniel's ranch as though she were trespassing, unsure where she belonged. But Daniel never raised his voice, never barked orders, never made them feel like burdens. Instead, he gave them work suited to their hands and words gentle enough to mend broken spirits. The girls helped gather eggs from the coop, their giggles echoing across the yard. Clara cooked in the kitchen, finding peace in the simple rhythm of stirring and kneading without fear of criticism. And Daniel, who had lived too long with silence, found himself laughing again when the smallest girl insisted on wearing his hat even while chasing chickens. One evening, after supper, Clara stepped out onto the porch where Daniel was sharpening a knife. The prairie stretched before them, endless and quiet. The girls had already gone to bed. "You've given them more in a week than their father gave in years," she said softly. Daniel paused, the whetstone still in his hand. "All I did was see them for who they are." Clara looked at him, her eyes shining in the starlight. "That's more than anyone else ever did." For a long while, they sat in silence, listening to the night sounds of the prairie, the lowing of cattle, the rustle of grass, the distant call of a coyote. And in that silence, something grew between them. Something unspoken, but real. The reckoning. But the past has a way of finding its way back. One late afternoon, Clara's husband came riding up the path, anger burning in his blood. He had sobered enough to realize what he had lost, control over his wife and daughters, and pride drove him back like a storm. Daniel stepped out to meet him, calm as ever. Shadows stood behind him, and the ranch dogs growled low. "What do you think you're doing, McGraw?" the man spat, sliding off his horse. "Those girls are mine. She's mine." Daniel's voice was quiet, but it carried weight. "You lost the right to claim him the moment you raised your hand in hate." The man sneered, stepping closer. "You think you can steal em from me? You think they'd rather have a broken-down widower than their own blood?" From the doorway, Clara's voice rang out, stronger than Daniel had ever heard it. "They would rather have a man who loves them, even if he isn't their blood. You gave them nothing but shame." The man froze at her words, stunned that she had found her courage. Daniel stood firm, one hand resting lightly on the handle of his colt, not drawing it, but reminding the drunkard that violence would not go unanswered. "You've got two choices," Daniel said evenly. "You walk away and let them live in peace, or you test just how far I'll go to protect them." The silence that followed stretched long. The drunkard's face twisted with rage, but the fire in Clara's eyes and the steel in Daniel's stance broke something in him. With a curse, he turned, mounted his horse, and rode off into the gathering dusk. Clara sagged against the doorway, her heart pounding. Daniel holstered his colt and walked back to her, his voice gentle. "It's over now." She looked at him, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "I thought I'd never be free of him." Daniel touched the brim of his hat. "Freedom ain't given. It's claimed. You just claimed yours." A new beginning. Seasons turned on the prairie. Summer faded into autumn, and the land was painted with gold and crimson. The girls thrived, healthy, smiling, learning to ride, learning to read by the firelight in the evenings when Daniel's deep voice read aloud from his worn Bible and Clara mended clothes beside him. What had begun as shelter turned into something more. The loneliness that had haunted Daniel slowly melted beneath laughter and warmth. Clara's shame gave way to pride, standing taller each day as she watched her daughters grow strong. And one winter evening, as snow drifted against the windows, Clara set a hand on Daniel's arm. Her voice was steady now, no longer afraid. "You didn't just raise them proud, Daniel. You raised me proud too." He turned to her, his eyes softening, and for the first time in many years, he let himself hope for more than survival. The widowed cowboy, once broken by loss, had found a family again. And the woman once punished for birthing daughters discovered that daughters could be blessings beyond measure, so long as they were raised with love and with pride. And together, they built a life where silence was no longer emptiness, but peace.